This is Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories, the state pension systems, Illinois' cooling real estate market, and the latest employment numbers. Then the Center Square's executive editor, Dan McCaleb, and editor Brett Rowland get together to further discuss the news. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Hi, this is Chris Krug, publisher of the Center Square. Our team produces the nationally read and recognized news stories at thecentersquare.com, the country's fastest growing, nonprofit, nonpartisan, state-focused news and information site. We deliver essential Illinois news and information with a taxpayer sensibility through reporting that's easy to understand and easy to share with your friends and family. We know that you want to get a quick update on what's happening at the state capitol in Springfield and across the state. Our team writes short, impactful stories that help all Illinoisans understand what's going on in their home state. We know that you need information that allows you to understand what the governor and your local legislators are doing. Our team covers government and the activity of elected officials so you can make sense of how their activity affects you and your family and your future here in Illinois. We know Illinois because we live in Illinois. Get the news that you need to know at thecentersquare.com. That's thecentersquare.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Here are some of the top stories from the past week. Illinois lawmakers and officials from state pension systems met to discuss a measure to address the state's unfunded liabilities. Andrew Hensel reports.
Teachers' Retirement System and State University Retirement System members spoke to the Illinois House Pension and Personnel Committee. The meeting focused on House Bill 4098, which would allow the Illinois Treasurer and Comptroller to transfer an additional $500 million from the General Revenue Fund to the Pension Unfunded Liability Reduction Fund. State Rep. Stephen Reich discussed the bill.
4098 is an omnibus bill. It covers a whole lot of stuff. It doesn't just cover the safe harbor provisions of Tier 2. It also handles the buyout, issues of buyouts. It handles the drop.
Reich says that the bill will still be worked on over the coming weeks before any vote is held.
3 more hearings on various aspects of the bill that we're going to have before we put it together in final form.
Illinois' unfunded pension liability is at least $140 billion. The funds are about 42% funded. I'm Andrew Hensel.
The once red-hot Illinois housing market is no more. According to data released by Illinois Realtors, home sales in July were down 21.4% compared to the same period last year. Daniel McMillan, head of the Department of Real Estate at the University of Illinois at Chicago, says there simply aren't enough available homes.
The really big change that we see is that the available housing inventory is down about 27%. And it's about the lowest that it's been since 2008.
McMillan says despite low inventories, the price of homes haven't budged much.
Even though the home sales have gone down substantially, the median sale price is just about the very same as it was last year.
As a result of low inventories, buyers are now looking at new construction. Sales of newly constructed homes nationwide were up 4.4% in July from the month before, and up over 31% from a year ago. Those are the top stories of the week from Illinois. Find more online at americastalking.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, the Center Square executive editor Dan McCaleb and editor Brett Rowland tackle the issues. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us in Illinois, from Rockford to Carbondale, from Quincy to Decatur. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, executive editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Greg Bishop has the week off, so joining me today is Brett Rowland, suburban Chicago resident and the Center Square's investigative and enterprise reporter. How are you today, Brett?
I'm doing good, Dan. Thanks for having me.
How are you and your family doing with this massive heat wave that's embraced the state of Illinois this week?
It's been rough so far. So my older son's baseball practice for fall ball got canceled yesterday. They're saying they're going to have baseball practice for my younger son who's playing t-ball. So we'll see how he does in 100-degree heat in the afternoon. We'll see.
Good luck with that. Bring plenty of water. You're going to need
I'm just hoping he knows where the bases are. I spent so much time trying to explain that. I'm hoping he gets it.
I remember those days. Brett, we're recording this on Thursday, August 24th. Before we get into the news of the week in Illinois, I know you covered the first Republican presidential primary debate last night, which was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, our neighbor to the north. Any big takeaways?
They all have a lot to say. And they weren't shy about interrupting one another and trying to get their point across. It was pretty freewheeling, especially at the beginning. There were some big moments for some of the second-tier candidates that I think stood out. It was definitely interesting to watch. If you like debates, if you don't think that debates are very helpful, especially televised ones, then your opinion of that would have been confirmed.
I don't know that it matters a whole lot to Illinois voters anyway. Assuming President Biden sticks with it and runs for re-election, he's almost guaranteed to win Illinois, which I couldn't even tell you the last time Illinois went for a Republican presidential candidate, certainly not during the Obama years, him being an Illinois resident and all. Anyway, Brett, why don't we get... I just learned. Breaking news is happening here shortly. We're hearing that the federal jury deliberating in the Tim Mapes perjury trial is about to return. He was longtime former House Speaker Michael Madigan's chief of staff. We're not going to know the verdict in time for this recording, but listeners can find our coverage of the story at thecentersquare.com. Brett, just briefly, just tell us what Mapes is on trial, was on trial for.
So he's been on trial for the last couple of weeks for perjury. He's been accused of lying to a grand jury about what he knew and when he knew it, essentially in relation to the wider probe involving his former boss, Mike Madigan.
All right, Madigan faces more than a dozen counts going to trial next year. He has pleaded not guilty. Again, listeners can find our coverage of the Mapes verdict at thecentersquare.com. So let's get into the news. We've been reporting on Illinois' massive unfunded pension liability at thecentersquare.com and talking about it at Illinois in Focus for years now. This week, state lawmakers actually held a hearing in Chicago on the state's worst in the nation pension crisis. Are they actually going to do something about it?
So we haven't heard a lot about this for several years. There haven't been a lot of hearings. There haven't been a lot of talk. There's been occasional reports that are issued, in due course. But this is the first time that I remember seeing at least a serious discussion about it. So there's a couple of House bills, one that would essentially move $500 million from the General Revenue Fund to the Pension Unfunded Liability Reduction Fund each fiscal year. And that money would be used to essentially make payments to the state's 5 retirement systems. So the state manages 5 pension systems. We've got the teachers' retirement system. We've got the state university retirement system, the state employees retirement system, the judges' retirement system, and the General Assembly retirement system, which I think is the worst funded of all. But altogether, more than $140 billion in unfunded liability, about 42% funded, and the worst funded in the nation, as you mentioned. But there is talk. So they're saying that they're going to work through the summer and hopefully have something that's presentable by next session. So that'll be interesting to see what develops here, to see if there's something substantive that can come out of this. This has been an issue that's frustrated lawmakers, that's frustrated taxpayers, that's frustrated pensioners and state employees for years. All the questions about, is there going to be enough money, I think have really weighed on people a lot.
So that $140 billion liability in the state's 5 pension funds that you referenced, Brett, that's according to the state. Some actuaries and other financial gurus put it at more than $200 billion because there are assumptions that are built into that. The state invests the dollars into essentially into stocks and bonds and whatnot, and they're counting on certain returns. And the actuaries are more conservative than the state is with what those returns will bring back. So it is massive. And of course, taxpayers in Illinois are on the hook for that. As I understand it, one of the things they're talking about is something they actually tried a few years ago to some limited success, and that was buyouts, allowing pensioners to buy out their pensions, meaning getting their full pension up front at a lesser amount than perhaps they'd get. Obviously it depends on how long they live after they retire, but anticipated that they'd get over the course of their rest of their lives. Is that one of the things they're looking at?
Yeah, so that's essentially foregoing those 3% annual increases, which can really sweeten the pension over time. So there's a lot to that, and we'll see. The early results on that seem to be good, but given the just massive amount of debt, there's going to be a lot. There's a ways to go even beyond. So buyouts may work to reduce some debt, but it's not going to solve the problem alone. It's going to have to be, from the experts we've talked to over the years, it's going to have to be multifaceted, many different ways to tackle this problem, just because of how long the debt has been accruing, how long people have known it was a problem, and how much they've kicked the can down the road.
Of course, this is a story that should be of interest to Illinois taxpayers and is of major interest to us at the Center Square. We've been following this story for a very long time, and we'll continue to report on any developments. Illinois this week, or actually Illinois in July, we just found out about it and reported on it this week, hit a milestone. A little bit late, but I guess you could say better late than never. For the first time since the beginning of the pandemic, Illinois finally returned to pre-pandemic job levels, meaning, of course, during the pandemic, when Governor Pritzker shut the state down, like governors across the country, small businesses were forced to close, businesses that were deemed non-essential, and it led to massive spikes in people applying for unemployment benefits. Well, here we are, August of 2023, 3.5 years after the start of the pandemic, and we finally returned to total job numbers that we had just before those layoffs started. Tell us about it.
So essentially, BLS numbers show that Illinois finally surpassed its January 2020 job levels in July of this year, which is a pretty big milestone. Now, most states and most of the rest of the country had done this about a year ago. So we're a little bit late to the party, but essentially more people are employed, and that's definitely a good thing for Illinois. But Illinois, and this has been true for years, Illinois has sort of lagged the rest of the states and the national economy in general. So if the national jobless rate is 3%, Illinois is usually a tad higher. So we've seen that for years and years, and I think that this is part of that trend. Although there are issues in Illinois that may have made it more difficult for jobs to come back. Those pandemic restrictions certainly didn't help, and Republicans in the state have been complaining for years that policies just aren't very friendly for job creators. And we've heard the Republicans echo that year after year after year, just saying that, Illinois is not a great place to do business, in part because of the high taxes and the regulations.
According to our Andrew Hensel's reporting on this, 37 states, essentially 75% of the country, had already hit pre-pandemic job numbers about a year or so ago. The only state in the Midwest that has not yet reached those levels is the state of Michigan. So at least Illinois beat Michigan to the milestone. And, hopefully jobs continue to come back and will be significantly above pre-pandemic levels.
That's right. Yeah. So Indiana reached it in February 22. Wisconsin did it in February 23. Iowa in March 2023. So we're definitely behind a lot of our neighbors there. But again, that's kind of been a long-standing trend for Illinois, is sort of being behind the rest of the nation and some of our neighbors in many cases. And we're seeing that yet again.
Well, we got there, Brett. But let's move on. Another bit of a downer story, I guess, out of the Illinois housing market continues to cool. Reporter Kevin Bessler reported on home sales, particularly compared to last year at this time, dropping significantly. What do we know?
So they're saying the main culprit here is interest rates. Home sales were down about 21% in July compared to the same period the prior year, which seems like a big number. So this is the number of sales. And they're really putting this squarely on interest rates, which are at the highest level they've been in decades. And inventory remains very low. So there's a lot of people who want to buy, and there's very few houses on the market. I can tell you this firsthand after buying earlier this year, and it appears the problem has only gotten worse. So that is, and it doesn't look like there's really an end in sight to this too. The Federal Reserve could take additional action in the coming months, so we'll sort of be watching what that does here. But there's some interesting figures here. In Illinois, the statewide median price of $285,000 was about 5.6 higher than it was last year at this time. So prices are still going up, even though sales are down. And so we're seeing some very interesting numbers. In Chicago, the median price was up 5.3% to $323,000 in July 2022.
Tell us a little about your experience.
So this was my first time buying a house. It was interesting. I think the biggest thing for us was finding a place we wanted a good school district, and we wanted to be relatively in the middle of the two places that my wife and I have to be. So she works on the south side of Chicago, and I work generally in the suburbs or occasionally downtown when there's something interesting happening. And so we wanted to be somewhere in the middle, and we found that supply was really tight.
Wow.
There just wasn't a lot on the market, and what was on the market was expensive. The interest rates definitely were not our friend, but we were able to find something that we like for now. Now, the house that we did end up moving into had been largely vacant for 14 years. So that'll tell you something about yes.
Wow.
That now, for being vacant that long, they did a lot of rehab work before it was sold. So it's in pretty good condition. I think I have a lifetime of projects ahead of me.
Thanks for sharing your personal story there, Brett. I'll just briefly share a personal story of mine. My wife and I have been talking about relocating to Texas for years now. She's a native Texan. I've been dragging her all over the country during our married life, last 15, 17 years or so here in Illinois. But because of these interest rates, we've put off even talking about it for the time being. And then you've got, I don't know if you paid attention to national weather. They've had something like 40 straight days of 100-degree temperatures. Taxes, much better situation in Texas than Illinois. That summer heat, though, boy, that's too much for me. Anyway, you referenced your wife works on the south side of Chicago. The Chicago White Sox broke this week that they might be looking to move out of the city, just like the Chicago Bears are moving out. Nothing's final yet, but the Chicago Bears are seriously looking at leaving the city. What's going on with the White Sox?
So this is pretty interesting. And Crane's Chicago business broke this story, and they essentially said, Chicago White Sox have about 6 years left on their contract or their lease at Guaranteed Rate Field, where they've been since 1991. And they've been in the city since 1910. I'm sure that you remember Comiskey Park too. They've at least broached the idea of moving. We got some interesting feedback this week. Our reporter Andrew Hensel talked with State Rep LaShawn Ford, who said that he thinks this is nothing more than a move by the team to get some financial interest from the state, from the city. He thinks it's sort of a ploy to get, see who's going to offer what to try to keep them. But at the same time, he said that, if they do move, and this is interesting. I want to quote him here. State Rep LaShawn Ford, he said, "This has nothing to do with Chicago. Chicago's a great city. Illinois is a great state. Anytime a business can get a press pop that talks about them thinking about moving or selling, it automatically gets prospects," Ford said. They are trying to test the value of their team. They want to see what they can get out of us at a big profit. And I think that he's seen this before. He's seen it with the Bears, and I think a number of other state lawmakers have too. And we've been through this before, so it'll be interesting to see what actually happens next. What are your thoughts, Dan?
Well, yeah, we've seen this from billionaire owners of professional sports teams across the country doing what they can to get local state politicians, what have you, to dole over as much taxpayer money as they can possibly get so it doesn't have to come out of their own pockets. We report on it pretty regularly at thecentersquare.com. One of the most notable and recent of those strategies is out of Tennessee, where it looks like taxpayers are going to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in their own money to build a new stadium for the NFL's Titans, which are located in Nashville. So no, this is not a unique thing. I do know, however, though, of course I know, my daughter is a huge White Sox fan. We took her to a couple of White Sox games for the brief period that she was home this summer. And when I texted her a link to our story, her response was, "Oh no," in all caps with like 8 exclamation points after it. I did tell her that this is all preliminary. They're committed to, they have a contract or a lease, I guess, for the stadium for, another 5 or 6 years. So they're not going anywhere anytime soon. Perhaps my wife and I will have relocated to Texas by then, so it won't really matter anyway. But yeah, it's I don't know, it's a big story because it is a professional sports team, and Southsiders are certainly proud of their White Sox. It would certainly hurt them. I don't like the whole, trying to get as much taxpayer money or taxpayers funding for support as it can.
Interesting part about that, Dan, before we transition, is that LaShawn Ford, who's always been a straight talker, he said that, if the Sox do move, there's a lot they could do with that space. And he suggested one thing would be housing, which Chicago needs more of.
Interesting. Time for one more story, Brett. And this has to do with the number of foreign nationals, migrants, who have relocated to Chicago. Mayor Brandon Johnson and former Mayor Lightfoot have said they're at their wits' end with housing for these migrants. An idea was floated to move many of them out to the suburbs, but there's a suburban mayor who's pushing back on that idea.
So Orland Park's mayor is saying what I'm guessing a lot of other suburban mayors might be thinking, is that they don't have the resources. Chicago's a big city with a lot of infrastructure, and Chicago is overwhelmed. So if Chicago is overwhelmed, moving them to places like Orland Park or some of the smaller suburbs, either in Cook County or outside of Cook County, would be difficult. And a lot of advocates for migrants have also pointed out that if you move them away from the infrastructure and the resources in Chicago, it's going to be much harder for them to get the things that they need to get. So essentially, if you in Woodstock in the far northwest suburbs, you're not going to have the same resource base or job opportunities or just any opportunities that you would have downtown Chicago. Chicago's a huge economic engine. There's offices, support. There's lots of
nonprofit groups that look out for example, the homeless, provide food and stuff like that.
Right. There's a lot more of that in the city than there are in the suburbs. Chicago does seem to be overwhelmed. What actually ends up happening here will be interesting. If some suburbs are willing to take them in, I think that would be very interesting to me. I would be somewhat surprised.
And this is not just an issue for Chicago. We should point out, too, New York City, whose mayor Eric Adams has even created these flyers that they're distributing at the southern border in Texas to border crossers, saying they just don't have the resources anymore. Don't come to New York, essentially, is what they say. We can't take care of you. We don't have the resources. Well, anyway, Brett, thanks for pitching in this week and filling in for Greg Bishop. Appreciate your insight on all of these important stories. Readers can keep up with these stories and more at thecentersquare.com. For Brett Rowland, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe, and thanks for listening.